An old paralyzed man gave his cabin to a black rejected pregnant woman. Then, the unusual happened. Eric Simmons sat on his wooden porch, his frail hand steadying the pen as he signed the final page. His lawyer's brows furrowed in disbelief. "Mr. Simmons, are you sure you want to give her your house? You've only known her 3 days." Beside him stood Glenda Brooks, a pregnant young woman with tired eyes and a worn duffel bag at her feet. Her breath caught as she watched the papers slide across the table, papers that made her the new owner of his cabin. "I'm sure," Eric said, his voice clear and firm. "This isn't a mistake. It's a correction, 6 to 2 years overdue." The lawyer hesitated before nodding and collecting the documents. The air was heavy with confusion and emotion. Glenda's hand shook as she accepted the deed, unsure whether to smile or cry. In that quiet Tennessee afternoon, two people who had once been strangers were bound by something neither could explain. What could make an old paralyzed man give away everything to a woman he barely knew? And what secret from his past ties their lives together in a way that will leave an entire town speechless? Would you have done the same if you were in Eric's place? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for part 2. You won't believe what follows next. Now come with us as we take you through how it all began. The afternoon sun burned through the Tennessee sky as Glenda Brooks trudged along the dusty road, her swollen feet scraping against the gravel. Sweat soaked her faded dress, clinging to her skin. Her duffel bag felt heavier with each step, but stopping wasn't an option. She had been walking for nearly 4 miles, the weight of her unborn child pressing against her ribs. Every house she had passed that day had either ignored her knock or turned her away the moment they saw her face and her belly. When she finally reached the small wooden gate at the edge of a property lined with tall oak trees, she stopped to catch her breath. The cabin in the distance looked old but cared for. She hesitated before stepping forward, unsure if she had the strength for another rejection. On the porch sat an elderly white man in a wheelchair, his face framed by deep lines and silver hair. His eyes followed her every move, curious, cautious, and strangely familiar. Eric Simmons had lived in that cabin for decades, his world now limited to the space between his porch and the nearby woods. When he saw Glenda standing there, exhausted and unsure, something in his chest stirred, a memory, a regret he had buried for over 60 years. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice rough but steady. Glenda took a step closer, brushing the sweat from her forehead. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," she said, her voice trembling with fatigue. "I'm looking for work. Any kind of work. I can clean, cook, help around the yard, whatever you need." Eric's gaze dropped to her belly. "You're in no shape to be working out in this heat," he replied. "I'm stronger than I look," she said, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I just need a place to stay for a little while. I'll pay you back once I find work." Her voice cracked at the last words, but her eyes stayed firm. She was used to rejection, but not ready to beg. Eric looked at her for a long moment, something tightening in his throat. Her tone, her strength, even her posture, it reminded him of someone. Someone from a time he preferred not to revisit. "Where did you walk from?" he asked. "From town. It's about 4 miles, I think." He frowned. "In this heat?" She nodded faintly. Nobody else would open their doors. Eric studied her closely. There was no self-pity in her expression, only exhaustion and quiet determination. For a moment, the porch seemed to fade away, replaced by the image of a grocery store in 1963. He saw himself behind the counter, younger, full of pride, turning away a young black woman who had asked for a job. She had smiled politely, thanked him anyway, and walked out. Her name had been Dorothy Brooks. He blinked, forcing the memory back. "There's a water pump by the barn," he said finally. "Go get yourself a drink, then come back. We'll talk. Glenda looked up, surprised. Really? Go before I change my mind. She hurried toward the barn, her shoulders shaking slightly, though whether from tears or relief, Eric couldn't tell. He sat silently, watching her disappear around the corner, and whispered to himself, Dorothy Brooks, could it be? When she returned, her face looked cleaner, her voice steadier. Eric motioned for her to sit on the porch chair beside him. Tell me your story, he said softly. The real one. Glenda hesitated, then began to speak. Her words came slowly, sometimes breaking as she tried to steady her emotions. She had lived in Nashville with her fiancé, Marcus, a man she had loved deeply. His family, wealthy and white, had welcomed her at first, until she got pregnant. Overnight, everything changed. They had offered her money to take care of it. When she refused, Marcus chose his family over her. Within weeks, she lost her job. Marcus's father had influence everywhere. Her rent fell behind, her apartment was gone, and her savings dwindled to nothing. I thought I could stay at a shelter, she said quietly, but they were all full. I didn't want to burden my family back home, they don't have much themselves. So, I left the city and kept going. Eric listened in silence, the guilt inside him tightening. This woman, young, capable, and cast aside, was living proof that the world still punished those who didn't fit its expectations. When she finished, she lowered her head. If you can't help, I understand. I'll find somewhere else. Eric's hand gripped his wheelchair armrest. You won't find many places better than this, he said slowly. And I'm not one to turn someone away when they're trying to stand on their own 2 feet. Glenda looked up, unsure she had heard him right. I can't offer you much work, Eric continued. But I could use help around the house. Cooking, laundry, things I can't manage from this chair. You'll have a room, food, and a safe place until the baby comes. Tears welled in her eyes. You'd really let me stay here? I would, he said, his voice roughening. But I want to make it clear, you're not a charity case. You're helping me as much as I'm helping you. She nodded, smiling weakly through her tears. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Eric turned his wheelchair toward the door, but paused before entering. One more thing, he said. I'm not waiting until I die to make things right. I'm giving you this cabin. It'll be yours. Glenda froze. You can't mean that. I do. It's already in motion. I've called my lawyer. Her voice rose in disbelief. You don't even know me. You can't just give away your home to a stranger. Eric met her gaze, his eyes wet. Maybe I don't know you yet. But I know your strength. And I know what it feels like to regret something for 60 years. I won't waste what time I have left doing nothing. Glenda pressed a hand to her chest, shaking her head. I can't accept that. It doesn't make sense. Neither does turning away someone who needs help, he said firmly. But I did that once. I won't do it again. As the sun dipped below the hills, silence settled between them. Glenda's face glowed faintly in the orange light, a mix of confusion, gratitude, and fear. Eric wheeled himself back inside, but his mind wouldn't rest. Dorothy Brooks. The name echoed in his head, mixing with the image of the young woman who had once stood at his grocery counter. Could Glenda be connected to her? That night, he sat by his desk, searching through old records with trembling hands. His pulse quickened as he found the name again, Dorothy Brooks, once a resident of Nashville, listed in a public directory from decades ago. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He didn't know the truth yet, but something deep inside told him this wasn't coincidence. For the first time in years, Eric Simmons felt both fear and hope at once. The first few days after Glenda moved into the cabin were quiet, almost awkward. Eric wasn't used to having another person in his space, especially someone young, energetic, and full of emotions he couldn't always read. Glenda, on her part, tiptoed through the house like a guest afraid to overstay her welcome. Every sound, the creak of the wooden floor, the clatter of dishes, even the hum of the old refrigerator, seemed louder in their shared silence. On the first morning, she cooked oatmeal and scrambled eggs. The smell drifted to the porch, where Eric sat reading. He looked up, startled when she appeared with a tray. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied, placing the tray on his lap carefully. "But I wanted to." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Thank you." That moment, simple, quiet, human, broke the tension. Over the next few days, Glenda started organizing his medicine, tidying up the shelves he couldn't reach, and helping him with the physical therapy exercises his doctor had prescribed. She guided his weakened arm through slow movements, her voice calm and patient. Sometimes, when the pain made him grimace, she would smile softly and say, "You're tougher than you think." Eric noticed her discipline. Every morning, she woke early, washed the dishes, and took short walks around the property despite her growing belly. He admired how she carried herself, with dignity, never self-pity. In her presence, the cabin felt alive again. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the crickets began their song, Glenda joined him on the porch after dinner. She carried 2 mugs of tea and handed him one. "You mind if I sit here?" she asked. He gestured to the chair beside him. "Not at all. It's your home now too." They sat in silence for a while, watching the horizon. Finally, Glenda spoke. "You ever feel like life keeps testing you just to see how much more you can take?" Eric let out a breath. "Every day since the stroke." She turned to him. "How long has it been?" 7 years, he said. "One side of my body decided it had enough of me. My wife, Margaret, passed away 2 years before that. After she was gone, I stopped caring about most things. The stroke just made it official." "I'm sorry," Glenda whispered. "Don't be. Margaret was the best part of me. She'd probably laugh if she saw me now, giving away the cabin to a stranger." Glenda smiled faintly. "She'd probably be proud you did." Eric looked at her, surprised by her certainty. "You think so?" "I do," she said. "You saw someone in need and you helped. That's what good people do." Their conversations became a ritual. Every evening, they sat together on that porch, sometimes talking about their pasts, sometimes about nothing at all. Eric learned that Glenda had a degree in marketing from a Nashville university. She'd worked hard to build her career, but after her breakup with Marcus, his family made sure no company in their circle would hire her again. "They said I embarrassed them," she told Eric one night, bitterness creeping into her tone. "They took everything from me except my child. That's one thing I refuse to give up." Eric nodded slowly. "Sounds like you got your strength from someone before you." "My grandmother used to say the same thing," Glenda said with a small laugh. "She told me that women in our family don't quit. We survive." Her mention of a grandmother stirred something in him again, but he said nothing. As the days passed, the distance between them shrank. Glenda discovered that Eric loved old movies, especially the black-and-white classics from the 1940s. One rainy afternoon, she found an old DVD player in a closet and set it up in the living room. Together, they watched It's a Wonderful Life, and when the final scene played, she noticed Eric wiping his eyes discreetly. She also found that he loved gardening, even though he couldn't do it anymore. So, she began tending the small patch outside the porch, planting tomatoes and herbs. "If I can't bend down there," he said one morning, At least I can watch them grow. Their bond deepened quietly, built on shared loss and small victories. Yet, there were moments when Eric drifted into silence, his eyes distant, his hands trembling as he scrolled through something on his old computer. Glenda noticed the change but didn't ask. She assumed he was thinking about his past or maybe about his health. In truth, he was searching. Late at night, when Glenda was asleep, Eric sat at his desk under the faint glow of a lamp. His trembling fingers typed Dorothy Brooks, Nashville, 1963. He scrolled through archives and public records until he found what he feared and hoped for all at once: a record showing Dorothy Brooks had once lived near his old grocery store. The realization made his stomach tighten. The woman he had turned away 60 years ago might have been Glenda's grandmother. He leaned back, staring at the screen, his eyes wet. He wasn't ready to tell her yet. Not until he was sure. Meanwhile, the outside world had started to notice their unusual living arrangement. Neighbors who used to wave politely now slowed their cars when passing the cabin, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Word spread through the small Tennessee town about the old man and the pregnant girl. Some said he was lonely and confused. Others whispered that she was taking advantage of him. The gossip reached Eric's distant nephew, Robert, a sharp-tongued man in his 40s who lived 2 towns over. He showed up one afternoon unannounced, his truck crunching over the gravel driveway. Glenda opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Eric Simmons," Robert said, brushing past her without waiting for an answer. Eric rolled in from the kitchen, his face tightening. "Robert, to what do I owe this surprise?" Robert crossed his arms. "Uncle, I heard you've got a guest. A pregnant woman staying here, helping around the house. Folks are saying you're giving her your property." Eric's tone was calm but sharp. "Folks should mind their business." Robert turned toward Glenda. I don't know what story you've told him, but my uncle isn't in his right mind. He's old and easily influenced. You should pack up before things get messy." Glenda's cheeks flushed. "I haven't taken anything from him. I'm just helping." Robert sneered. "Helping yourself, maybe." "Enough," Eric said, his voice loud enough to silence him. "You don't talk to her that way. She's under my roof, and that means she's family." Robert's jaw clenched. "Family? She's a stranger." "Was," Eric said. "Not anymore." The younger man shook his head in disbelief. "You'll regret this, Uncle. People are already talking. You're destroying your reputation." "I stopped caring about that a long time ago," Eric said firmly. Robert stared at him a moment longer, then turned and walked out without another word. The sound of his truck faded down the road, leaving only the hum of the crickets. Glenda stood quietly beside Eric, her hands clasped together. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "You've got nothing to be sorry for," he said softly. "The only mistake I ever made was caring too much about what people thought." As the evening light dimmed over the hills, Glenda looked at him with quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe, and maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to belong. The day of Eric's doctor's appointment began quietly. Glenda helped him into his wheelchair, adjusting the lap blanket before guiding him toward the old pickup truck. She noticed the tension in his shoulders but said nothing. The moment they reached town, she understood why. Heads turned. Conversations paused. At the medical center, people whispered as they passed. A pregnant black woman pushing a frail white man in a wheelchair was not something the town of Millstone saw every day. The receptionist's smile was forced, her tone clipped. Glenda focused on helping Eric sign in, ignoring the stares. After the appointment, they stopped by the pharmacy. As Glenda handed over Eric's prescription, a woman near the counter muttered just loud enough, "Why is that woman with him? What's she after?" Eric's hand gripped his wheelchair armrest. His voice, usually calm, cut through the silence. This woman has more integrity than most people in this town combined. The room froze. Glenda's heart raced as he continued, "If you knew what she's done for me, you'd be ashamed to open your mouth." By the next morning, someone had filmed the entire scene. The video spread through local social media. Half the town applauded Eric's words. The other half called it a disgrace. Some labeled Glenda a manipulator. Others called Eric senile. That afternoon, a visitor arrived at the cabin. Ms. Ruth Washington, the owner of the town diner. Her warm smile carried the weight of years of wisdom. "I just had to meet the woman causing all this fuss," she said, chuckling as Glenda served her tea. Over lunch, Ms. Ruth's tone turned thoughtful. "Your last name's Brooks, isn't it? I knew a Dorothy Brooks once. Smart woman. Hard-working. This town never gave her a chance." Eric froze. His hand trembled slightly on his teacup. Glenda's eyes widened. "That was my grandmother," she said softly. Ms. Ruth nodded. She deserved more. Folks like her were crushed by small-minded people here. She looked toward Eric. "Some of them still are." Eric didn't speak. His face was pale, his thoughts racing. That night, he stayed awake long after Glenda went to bed, staring at the old photo on his dresser, the one that connected everything. Days later, a formal notice arrived. Eric's nephew, Robert, had filed a petition to have him declared mentally incompetent, arguing that his decision to transfer the cabin was proof of confusion. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. The town hall was packed. Glenda sat beside Eric, her palms damp. Robert stood with his lawyer, his expression hard. "My uncle is not of sound mind," he declared. "This woman has manipulated him for her own benefit." Gasps rippled through the crowd. When the judge allowed witnesses, Glenda rose. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Eric Simmons is the sharpest, kindest man I've ever met. He may not walk, but he sees clearer than most people in this room. He made a choice, an act of kindness that gave me hope when the world turned its back on me." The courtroom was silent. Dr. Hendricks, Eric's physician, confirmed what Glenda already knew. "Mr. Simmons is fully competent. His mind is as strong as ever." The judge ruled swiftly, "The property transfer stands." Outside, some townsfolk muttered angrily. Others offered quiet nods of respect. But the peace didn't last. That evening, Eric found a brick lodged in the front window. The mailbox was bent and scrawled with slurs. Glenda's eyes filled with tears, but Eric only sighed. "They're scared," he said softly. "Scared of seeing what kindness looks like." The next morning, Glenda swept the broken glass off the porch. Eric joined her, his wheelchair rolling to her side. "We'll fix the window," he said. "And the mailbox. They can't scare us off." She looked at him and smiled faintly. "We'll stand together." "Together," he promised. As the sun rose over the Tennessee hills, their small cabin, once a symbol of one man's solitude, had become something far stronger. A challenge. A statement. A home where judgment met grace, and two broken lives found the courage to stand side by side. 6 weeks passed, and the cabin that once felt quiet now pulsed with life. Glenda's belly had grown round and firm, her movements slower but filled with purpose. Eric refused to let her lift heavy things, even though he could barely lift his own legs. "You're carrying the future," he'd tease. "I'll handle the rest." He insisted on converting his own bedroom into a nursery. Glenda protested, but Eric wouldn't hear it. "A baby deserves a real room," he said firmly, his hand steady on the wheelchair as he directed where to place the crib. He moved his own sleeping space to the living room, beside the old fireplace. Their shopping trips became small adventures. Eric maneuvered his chair through narrow store aisles, laughing whenever he bumped into displays. Glenda smiled more in those moments than she had in months. He helped her pick baby clothes, blankets, and tiny socks she held against her cheek, overwhelmed by how real motherhood suddenly felt. When Ms. Ruth organized a surprise baby shower, Glenda cried openly. The diner was decorated with pastel balloons and handmade signs that read "Welcome, Little Miracle." Members of the black community came, along with a few white residents who had quietly chosen compassion over gossip. Glenda received knitted blankets, diapers, and a hand-carved rocking chair made by one of Eric's old friends. For the first time since arriving in Millstone, Glenda felt accepted. "These people barely know me," she whispered to Eric. He smiled softly. Sometimes strangers see the heart clearer than family ever could. That night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were washed, Glenda noticed Eric sitting quietly by the window, lost in thought. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the moonlit yard. "Eric," she said gently, "you've been distant tonight." He exhaled slowly. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said weeks ago." Her chest tightened. "What is it?" He hesitated, his voice shaking. "Your grandmother, Dorothy Brooks. I knew her. In 1963, she came to me looking for work. I was managing the lumber yard then. She begged for a job, said she didn't mind the hours or the pay. But I turned her away because of her skin color. I told myself it was company policy, but I knew better." His eyes filled with tears. "She lost her home that year. I've spent 60 years trying to forget the look on her face." Glenda's lips parted, but no words came. He continued, voice barely above a whisper. "When I found out who you were, I couldn't sleep. I searched online, found everything I could about her. She built her life back, raised her family. But she never should have had to. I took something from her that day. I can't fix what I did to her, but I can make sure her granddaughter never struggles like that again." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside. Tears rolled silently down Glenda's cheeks. Finally, she spoke. "You're not the same man who made that choice. You're the man who's choosing differently now." Eric looked at her in disbelief. "You forgive me?" She nodded slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. But it lets us build something better from it." He reached out, his frail hand finding hers. They sat together in silence, two generations bound by pain and healing. Later, as Glenda prepared for bed, she hesitated at the door. "Eric," she said softly, "I'm scared." He looked up from his chair. "Of what?" "Of giving birth. Of doing this alone. Of failing my child before they even start life." Eric's eyes softened. "You're not alone, Glenda. I'll be here for every moment. I'll help raise that baby like my own grandchild. That's a promise." Her shoulders relaxed, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Thank you." From that night on, their bond felt unbreakable. They shared quiet mornings drinking tea, evenings sorting baby clothes, and late-night talks about everything from faith to forgiveness. The cabin, once filled with loneliness, now glowed with anticipation. 3 days before her due date, the peace shattered with a sharp cry. Glenda doubled over near the kitchen counter, the mug in her hand falling and breaking against the floor. Eric wheeled toward her in alarm. "Glenda." Her face tightened in pain. "It's happening," she gasped. Eric's hand shook as he grabbed the phone. "Stay calm. Breathe. I'm calling Ms. Ruth." The contractions came fast, stronger each time. As Eric reached for her hand, he whispered, "You're going to be fine. You've got this." Outside, Thunder rumbled in the distance as rain began to fall against the roof. Inside, the two people who had started as strangers prepared for the moment that would change both their lives forever. The morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Glenda sliced toast for breakfast. She laughed softly at Eric's grumble about the taste of instant coffee. It was an ordinary morning, until she felt a sudden sharp pain shoot through her abdomen. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering onto the counter. A wet warmth spread down her legs. Her eyes widened. "Eric, my water just broke." Eric froze for a heartbeat, his coffee cup trembling in his grip. Then his voice turned calm and firm. "Stay where you are, Glenda. Breathe." He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with practiced precision. "Yes, this is Eric Simmons. We need an ambulance immediately. She's in active labor." Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air. Paramedics burst through the door, moving quickly. Glenda winced as another contraction hit, gripping the table for balance. Eric rolled to her side, reaching for her hand. "You're going to be fine," he said, steady and sure. "They're taking good care of you." As they lifted her into the ambulance, she turned to him, eyes wet. "You're coming, right?" "Try and stop me," he said, already maneuvering his wheelchair toward the open doors. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics worked around them, monitoring Glenda's vitals. Eric's presence anchored her through each contraction. His paralyzed left hand rested on her arm, trembling but steady. Between labored breaths, she whispered, "You're really staying." "Every second," he replied. "You're not doing this alone." At the hospital, chaos met them, nurses rushing, machines beeping, bright lights flashing. Yet Eric's voice was constant. "Breathe in, hold, exhale. That's it, Glenda. You're stronger than you think." Hours passed. Sweat soaked Glenda's forehead as she pushed, her cries echoing through the delivery room. Eric's grip tightened around her hand. His own body trembled from the strain, but he refused to let go. "You've got this," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're almost there." A final push, and the air filled with a newborn's cry. A tiny, healthy baby girl, weighing 7 pounds 3 ounces. Glenda collapsed back onto the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The nurse gently placed the baby in her arms. "She's perfect," Glenda whispered, her voice trembling. "My Dorothy Grace." Eric couldn't stop crying. He felt warmth rise in his chest, something pure and unexplainable. As he looked at the child, a quiet peace settled over him. For a moment, he swore he could feel Dorothy Brooks's presence, gentle, forgiving, and proud. One nurse, smiling kindly, said, "She looks just like you, Grandpa." Neither corrected her. Glenda turned to Eric, eyes glistening. "Dorothy Grace Brooks Simmons," she said softly. "After my grandmother, and you." Eric covered his face with his good hand, overwhelmed. The guilt he had carried for 62 years seemed to melt away with every tiny sound the baby made. "Thank you," he whispered. "You'll never know what this means to me." The nurses exchanged knowing glances, whispering about the odd but beautiful pair. Some had been confused at first, but watching the way Eric hovered protectively near Glenda, they began to understand. Hours later, Robert stormed into the hospital room, lawyer in tow. "This has gone far enough," he snapped. "You've manipulated my uncle. I'm filing for guardianship and contesting the property transfer." Glenda, pale and exhausted, shifted the baby protectively in her arms. "You need to leave," she said quietly but firmly. Eric's voice cut through the tension. "Robert, not now." The lawyer began speaking, but Dr. Hendricks entered, his tone sharp. "Unless you're here as next of kin for the patient, You need to leave. This woman just gave birth. If you don't walk out right now, I'll have security remove you myself." Robert's face reddened, but seeing the doctor's steady glare, he turned and stormed out. That night, the hospital lights dimmed. Glenda slept lightly, her newborn resting in the bassinet beside her. Eric sat in the chair near the bed, exhaustion heavy in his limbs but peace heavy in his heart. He looked at the baby, then at Glenda, then back again. "She's perfect," he whispered. Glenda stirred, opening her eyes. "I can't believe she's real." "She's proof," Eric said softly, his voice almost breaking. "Proof that new beginnings can come from the hardest mistakes." They talked in quiet tones about the future, how they'd share responsibilities, how he'd help her raise Dorothy. "I may not be able to run," Eric said, "but I can hold her, feed her, teach her everything I've learned about life." Glenda smiled weakly. "We'll figure it out together." As the baby let out a soft sigh in her sleep, Eric closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. In that hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the promise of a new beginning, two broken souls finally found wholeness through the smallest, most perfect miracle. 3 days after Dorothy Grace's birth, the hospital cleared Glenda for discharge. Eric insisted on handling the paperwork himself, rolling up to the counter with his determined expression that nurses had learned not to question. The ride back to Millstone felt unreal. Glenda's arms cradled the sleeping baby while Eric stared out the window, silently thanking the universe for a miracle he never thought he'd witness. When the cab turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin, Glenda gasped. Cars were lined up along the driveway, and the front porch was covered in ribbons and balloons. The smell of baked chicken and cornbread drifted through the air. Ms. Ruth stood at the center of the crowd, waving a kitchen towel like a victory flag. "Welcome home, Mama," she shouted, her smile wide. Members of the black community surrounded them with laughter, hugs, and casseroles. Even a few white neighbors who once looked away were there, awkward but sincere. Inside, Glenda froze in disbelief. The once plain nursery was now a dream. The walls were painted soft yellow with clouds stenciled above the crib. Handmade curtains framed the window, and the shelves were filled with diapers, toys, and tiny clothes folded neatly in baskets. A sign above the crib read Dorothy Grace, loved from the start. Glenda's voice broke. "Who did all this?" Ms. Ruth's eyes sparkled. "The community. You gave them something to believe in, baby. We all needed this." Eric wheeled forward, staring at the transformed room. His lips trembled. "It's perfect," he whispered. That first week tested them in every possible way. Glenda barely slept, her body still sore from labor, her emotions swinging from joy to exhaustion. Dorothy's cries filled the cabin at all hours, but Eric was there, every time. He'd position his wheelchair beside the crib, carefully lift the baby into his lap, and hum old gospel tunes his late wife used to sing. His voice was gravelly, but Dorothy always settled in his arms. During feedings, Glenda would sit beside him, smiling faintly at the sight of his rough, trembling hands cradling the newborn with astonishing gentleness. One evening, as Glenda folded laundry, she looked over to see Eric reading aloud from a children's book. His voice softened at each word. "Once upon a time, there was a girl who brought light to a tired old man's world." Glenda blinked back tears. "You're a natural," she said quietly. He smiled without looking up. "Guess I've been waiting for the right audience." A week later, an unexpected visitor arrived. Pastor James Miller, the white minister of Millstone Baptist Church, knocked on the door holding a Bible and a look of humility. Glenda hesitated before opening it, but Eric nodded for her to let him in. "I owe you both an apology," Pastor Miller said immediately. "When I saw the online post about you two, I realized our church has spent years ignoring the kind of love and grace we preach about every Sunday." He swallowed hard. Mr. Simmons, your act of kindness forced me to look at myself, and the silence I've allowed in our congregation. Eric's eyes softened. Took me most of my life to see it too, Pastor. Took me 60 years. The pastor bowed his head. I'd like to start making things right. I want our church to help, however we can. That visit sparked something unexpected. Over the next week, more neighbors began showing up. Mrs. Carson from down the road brought a chicken pot pie and apologized for the gossip she'd spread. Mr. Douglas from the hardware store dropped off baby supplies and shook Eric's hand. You taught us more about decency than 100 sermons ever could, he said simply. By the second week, their story reached beyond Millstone. A local journalist interviewed them for a human interest feature titled A Cabin, a Gift, and the Grace That Healed a Town. The photos, Eric in his wheelchair, Glenda holding Dorothy, captured hearts everywhere. Within days, national outlets called, wanting interviews. Messages poured in from strangers saying their story had given them hope. The shift in town was unmistakable. People started talking, not just about Eric and Glenda, but about forgiveness, history, and change. At the diner, old patrons who once avoided Ms. Ruth's tables now came to listen. If an 85-year-old man can face his mistakes, Ms. Ruth said proudly, what's stopping the rest of y'all? Even Robert changed. A week after the story aired, he posted a public apology online. His message read, I let greed and prejudice blind me. My uncle showed me what true integrity looks like. I'm sorry, Glenda. Though neither Glenda nor Eric replied, his words rippled through Millstone, forcing conversations many had long avoided. The town council invited Eric and Glenda to a meeting at City Hall. At first, Glenda hesitated. After everything they've said about us, why should we go? Because real change needs witnesses, Eric replied. The room was full that evening. Some residents came curious, others ashamed. When Eric rolled forward to speak, the silence was heavy. I made mistakes that hurt people like Glenda's grandmother, he said slowly. But this young woman gave me a chance to be better. You don't fix the past by hiding it. You fix it by facing it. When Glenda took the podium, her voice shook but never faltered. Eric saw me when everyone else turned away. That's what love does. It sees past fear. This town can do the same. The crowd rose in applause, tears glinting in many eyes. By the end of the night, the mayor announced something that stunned everyone: the creation of the Dorothy Brooks Memorial Scholarship, funded by community donations, to support young black women pursuing college education. Ms. Ruth wiped her eyes. Your grandma's name gonna live forever now, she whispered to Glenda. As they left the meeting, Eric looked up at the stars. Never thought I'd see this day, he murmured. Glenda smiled, the baby sleeping peacefully against her chest. You didn't just change one life, Eric, she said softly. You changed a whole town. He looked at her with quiet wonder. No, he said. We did. 6 months passed, and the cabin that once echoed with silence now overflowed with laughter, lullabies, and the soft rhythm of new life. Dorothy Grace had grown into a chubby, bright-eyed baby with a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. Every morning, her giggles greeted the dawn before Glenda's coffee finished brewing. The once quiet cabin had become a home in every sense. Eric had settled into a rhythm that surprised everyone, including himself. His days revolved around Dorothy, feeding her, singing off-key nursery songs, and making exaggerated faces that sent her into fits of laughter. His wheelchair rolled across the wooden floors with practiced ease, his hand steady and confident. While Glenda worked remotely from her small desk by the window, writing marketing campaigns and answering client calls, Eric transformed into the world's most devoted babysitter. He narrated everything he did in his low, gentle voice. Now, Little Miss Sunshine, "We're going to read about bears," he'd say, holding up a picture book. "You know what a bear says? Go." Dorothy would squeal, reaching for his beard and tugging until they both laughed uncontrollably. Ms. Ruth stopped by often, usually bringing food and fussing over Dorothy as though she were her own grandchild. "You two are working miracles," she'd say, shaking her head. "I don't know if it's love or divine intervention, but whatever it is, it's beautiful." And in a way, she wasn't wrong. Eric's physical therapist had noticed something remarkable. His blood pressure had stabilized, his energy had improved, and even his complexion seemed brighter. At one session, the therapist smiled after testing his grip. "Purpose is powerful medicine, Eric," she said. "You're defying expectations." But the most astonishing change began one ordinary afternoon. Glenda was typing away at her laptop while Eric rocked Dorothy in his lap. The baby grabbed his left hand, the hand that hadn't moved in 7 years, and squeezed it tight. He felt it. A faint tingling. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination. But when Dorothy's tiny fingers brushed his palm again, one of his own fingers twitched. Just slightly, but enough for his breath to catch. "Glenda." His voice trembled. "Come here." She turned, eyes wide. "What is it?" He lifted his left hand, slow, shaky, but unmistakably moving. "Did you see that?" She made it move. Glenda covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Eric, that's impossible." He laughed, a shaky, emotional sound. "Maybe so. But she just proved impossible doesn't mean much anymore." From that day forward, something extraordinary unfolded. Each week brought more progress. First small movements, then greater control. He could lift his arm partway, then nearly to shoulder height. His doctors were baffled. One neurologist called the recovery unprecedented, shaking his head in disbelief. "We can't explain this medically," he admitted. "It's as if your brain found new roads to travel." Eric smiled faintly. Maybe love built those roads. When the day finally came that he could hold Dorothy in both arms, the entire cabin seemed to glow. He cradled her against his chest, his left arm trembling slightly but strong enough to support her. Tears ran freely down his cheeks. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he whispered. "Both arms around someone I love." Glenda stood nearby, watching through a haze of emotion. "You're getting your life back by giving everything away," she said softly. He looked at her and nodded. "That's the secret, isn't it? The more you give, the more you heal." Word of his recovery spread quickly through Millstone. Neighbors who had followed their journey since the baby's birth began stopping by just to see Eric's progress. When his therapist suggested trying assisted walking, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. They cleared the community center for his first session, cheering him on as he gripped parallel bars with both hands. Glenda held Dorothy at the front of the room, whispering encouragement. Eric's face tightened with determination. One step. Then another. 7 years after the accident, he walked, slow, unsteady, but on his own 2 feet. The room erupted in applause. Glenda cried openly, clutching Dorothy close as Eric reached her and bent, trembling, to kiss the baby's forehead. "This is what grace looks like," he said through tears. The following Sunday, the local church invited them to share their story. The sanctuary was packed, black and white residents sitting side by side, something rarely seen in Millstone before. Pastor Miller introduced them quietly. "What we've witnessed in this family," he said, "is living proof that forgiveness and love can rebuild what prejudice once destroyed." Eric spoke first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I used to think miracles were for other people," he began. "But then I realized miracles show up when you start living for something bigger than yourself." Glenda followed, holding Dorothy on her hip. "When I came to this town, I thought I was alone," she said. "But Eric showed me that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you need them most. And this town showed up." When the service ended, people lingered to thank them, hug them, and share how their story had changed them. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect became undeniable. 3 families who had once lived in quiet division reached out to help those they'd previously rejected. A white couple began mentoring a young black student. A business owner offered free meals to struggling single mothers. And the church, once divided by history, started hosting community dinners where everyone sat together. Back at the cabin that evening, Glenda watched Eric stretch his newly strengthened arm as Dorothy babbled in her playpen. The glow of the sunset washed the room in gold. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. He smiled, rubbing his arm thoughtfully. "Every single day. Sometimes I still don't believe it." Glenda looked at Dorothy and whispered, "Maybe she's not just our miracle, maybe she's the reason this whole town found healing." Eric nodded slowly. "Dorothy Grace," he said, smiling down at the child who had changed everything. "The name fits her perfectly." The day dawned warm and golden, sunlight spilling across Millstone like a blessing. Balloons swayed gently on the white picket fence outside the cabin, where tables were covered with bright tablecloths, home-cooked dishes, and a single pink cake topped with a candle shaped like the number 1. Laughter filled the air as neighbors, black and white, young and old, mingled without hesitation. What had once been a divided town now gathered as one family, united by the story that had changed them all. Dorothy Grace, dressed in a tiny yellow dress, sat on Glenda's hip, waving her chubby hands toward the crowd. Eric moved through the party with a cane in one hand and Dorothy's stuffed bunny tucked under his arm. He looked years younger, his movement steady, his spirit lighter than it had been in decades. When the music quieted, Glenda stepped forward, her voice carrying across the yard. "Thank you, everyone, for being here to celebrate Dorothy's first birthday," she began, smiling at the sight of so many familiar faces. "This little girl was born into uncertainty, but she's grown surrounded by love, because of all of you." She paused, glancing at Eric, who stood beside her, proud and steady. "Today isn't just about her birthday," Glenda continued. "It's about new beginnings. That's why I'm starting something called Dorothy's House, a non-profit to help rejected pregnant women find safety, housing, and hope." A soft murmur spread through the crowd as she went on. "No woman should have to face the kind of isolation I did. Dorothy's house will be a place where second chances are real, where no one's past defines their future." The announcement drew warm applause, and Ms. Ruth wiped her eyes before calling out, "Well, I suppose it's time you all knew what I've been keeping quiet. My diner's been closed these past few months because I'm donating it to Dorothy's house. That building's got a lot of memories, and it's time it made new ones, good ones." Gasps of surprise turned into cheers. Glenda pressed a hand to her heart, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Ms. Ruth, that's more than I could have ever asked for." "Child," Ms. Ruth said with a smile, "you've already given this whole town more than we ever asked for." As the celebration continued, another surprise unfolded. Robert, Eric's nephew, arrived quietly, holding a tray of cupcakes. He looked different, humbler, softer. Gone was the defensiveness and entitlement that once defined him. Instead, he walked up to Glenda and Eric with an awkward smile. "I've been volunteering at Dorothy's house," he said. "Figured it was time I started fixing the mess I helped make." Eric clasped his shoulder. "Proud of you, son," he said gently. Pastor Miller joined them soon after, announcing that his church would provide financial support to help Dorothy's house open its doors within the year. "Faith without action means nothing," he said. "You two showed us what faith in people can really do." As dusk settled and the candles flickered to life, Eric tapped his cane lightly against the porch floor and cleared his throat. The chatter quieted instantly. "A year ago," he began, "I thought my life was over. I was just waiting to die. Then Glenda walked up my driveway, scared, tired, and carrying more strength than I've ever seen in another human being. I gave her a cabin, but she gave me something greater. She gave me purpose, family, and the chance to finally make peace with my past." The crowd stood silent, many wiping tears. Glenda took his hand, her voice trembling but sure. "Eric didn't just give me shelter," she said. "He gave me dignity, hope, and proof that people can change. He showed me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice, commitment, and love." Applause rolled across the yard like a wave. Then Eric turned toward the crowd again, smiling through tears. "Before we cut the cake, there's one more thing I'd like to share," he said. "I've made arrangements for a trust fund for Dorothy's education. It's funded by the sale of my late wife's family land. I can't undo the mistakes of the past, but I can make sure this little girl's future is secure." Gasps filled the air again, followed by cheers. But the emotion of the evening wasn't finished yet. As twilight deepened, a black sedan pulled up on the gravel road. Marcus stepped out, nervous, dressed simply, holding an envelope. He walked toward Glenda and stopped a few feet away. "I heard about what you've built here," he said softly. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For abandoning you. For running from my responsibilities. I've started making things right. Child support, whatever you and Dorothy need." Glenda looked at Eric, then back at Marcus. Her tone was calm but firm. "I appreciate that," she said. "But Dorothy has a father figure already. Eric is her grandfather in every way that matters. You're welcome to visit someday, but understand, she already has her family." Marcus nodded slowly, emotion thick in his voice. "I get it," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you, for giving her the life I couldn't." He placed the envelope on the porch railing and walked back to his car. When he was gone, Eric exhaled softly. "You handled that with more grace than I ever could have." Glenda smiled faintly. "Grace seems to run in this family." Later that evening, after the guests had left and the lantern swayed gently in the night breeze, Glenda and Eric sat on the porch, Dorothy toddling between them. She took one unsteady step, then another, giggling as both reached out to catch her. Eric steadied himself with his cane and laughed. 62 years ago, I failed Dorothy Brooks," he said softly. "Today, I get to watch her namesake take her first steps. That's not just redemption, that's grace." The camera of life seemed to pull back then, showing the whole town below the cabin. Black and white neighbors mingled at a block party, children chasing fireflies, old rivalries forgotten. Music drifted through the evening air as laughter echoed across Millstone. The porch light glowed behind Eric, Glenda, and Dorothy. 3 lives forever bound by compassion, courage, and forgiveness. Their story had begun in brokenness but ended in wholeness. A man once paralyzed by guilt had learned to walk again. A woman once abandoned had found belonging. And a child named Dorothy Grace had united an entire community. Love had done what history could not. It healed. What seemed unusual was actually extraordinary. An 85-year-old paralyzed man gave everything he owned to a rejected stranger, and in return, he received the miracle of healing, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Their story proves that it's never too late to choose love over fear. It reminds us that family isn't always about blood, but about compassion, loyalty, and the courage to care when no one else will. Eric and Glenda's journey changed more than their lives. It changed what was possible in a town long divided by judgment and silence. Through forgiveness, sacrifice, and shared humanity, they built something lasting, a family born not of circumstance, but of choice. This story shows us that redemption is always within reach and that love can heal wounds we once thought were permanent. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another one of these powerful, true stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and how this story inspired you. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another incredible story that will restore your faith in humanity. Your likes, comments, and shares help us keep sharing these life-changing stories with the world. Thank you for being part of our community.